True story. Met this guy in a field once, and he was an axe thrower. And I asked him, how do you get to throwing axes for a living? And he answered, well, I got made redundant, and I promised myself that I'd never let that happen again. So my only option was to do my own thing. And that took me on this mad adventure that saw me on Dragon's Den. And now I'm living my best life teaching people to throw axes. That story has lingered with me for a long time. They say that the biggest regret of the dying is not living a life true to yourself, living someone else's story. I don't know about you, but I definitely don't want that to be my biggest regret. So I grew up as a bedroom coder. I loved taking things apart and then putting them back together again, trying to figure out how they worked, trying to decode things. And then fast forward a few years, and decoding things basically became my job. I started a few successful technology businesses, and on my journey, I met all kinds of incredibly inspirational people. And what I noticed is that those inspirational people would regularly live outside of their comfort zones, creating inspirational stories for themselves as they went. And yet so many other people seemed to be playing it safe, following the well-trodden path laid out for them by a crusty old careers advisor. So I asked myself the question, why does that happen? Why is it that some people seem to be running on their own software designed for themselves when other people seem to be running on someone else's? So to try and answer the question, I first turned to science, and science said that it's all down to intrinsic motivation, this type of motivation that comes from deep within us rather than from some external force. But what science can't answer is, where does that magic ingredient of intrinsic motivation come from? So from my own experience, I was sure that the answer was how people change, and whether change was something that could be developed as a skill in life. But where does change come from? And can it be developed? So it being 2018 at the time, I thought, what better way to answer that question than to start a podcast? So over the last year, I've had dozens of candid conversations with all kinds of inspiring people, from endurance athletes to axe throwers, wizards, and adventurers, and on and on. And what I've tried to do is decode the patterns of how these people have embraced change in their lives in order to live a life true to themselves. And I'm going to share with you today what I've learned. First, let me introduce you to Alistair. So I interviewed Alistair this summer at the British Library. The security there wouldn't let him in because his bag was too big. To be fair, that bag was massive. And I wondered what was in that bag. So anyway, Alistair grew up as Mr. Ordinary. He did pretty well through school, trained to become a teacher. And then upon graduating, he was offered a good job at a nice school as a science teacher. And in that moment, Alistair could see the next 40 years of his life mapped out in front of him. And it was nice, and it was ordinary. But Alistair didn't want to be ordinary. He imagined himself as an adventurer, like his hero, Sir Ranulph Fiennes. And so Alistair faced a big dilemma. Does he walk the well-trodden path, or does he write an inspirational story for himself? Well, he literally did the latter. He wrote a letter to Mr. Walker, the head teacher who had offered him that nice, ordinary job, rejecting the offer and explaining that instead he was going to cycle around the world. Not having ridden any real distance on a bike before, Alistair packed up his bike, told his friends and family, and then off he went, not fully believing that he'd complete his challenge. 4 years, 46,000 miles, and 5 continents later, Alistair returned. He'd cycled the whole way around the world. And over the next year, he went on to inspire people all around the country by talking to them about his stories of adventure. But deep down, he didn't feel like a real adventurer. He felt a bit like a one-trick pony, a bit like a fraud. And so over the next 6 years, he went on more and more extreme adventures, culminating in him rowing the Atlantic. And then in 2012, Alistair Humphreys was named National Geographic Adventurer of the Year. He was now a real adventurer. What I learned from my conversation with Alistair, and so many other similar conversations on the podcast, is that it is possible to develop change as a skill in your life by embracing the unknown and living a life true to yourself. The thing with change is it happens to us in life all the time. It's a constant, from the little things, like trains being late, to the big things, like loved ones dying. If we attempt to avoid or resist change, it happens to us anyway. But if we initiate change, it's much easier to adapt to it because we want it. And with that, there's this positive side effect. Like anything that you practice, you can get better at it over time. So the other thing that really shows up time and time again in these conversations on the podcast is the power of the stories that people hold on to. Stories both fuel and enable us, but they can also limit us and hold us back. I believe that the answer to that question that science can't answer, of where does intrinsic motivation come from, is that intrinsic motivation comes from you replacing a story with the makings of a better story. But what if you're not sure what the makings of that better story is? Well, and why don't you make it easier for yourself and just go swap the story out? Well, the reason for it is because of the way that our brains are wired. So we have two main parts of our brains, and they're in constant conflict around the decisions that we make in life. The first part, the oldest part, the amygdala, let's call it the health and safety officer. It's got just one job to do, and that's to keep us alive. So it loves the known, and it hates the unknown. And then the other part, the newest, biggest, most interesting part of our brain, the neocortex, we're going to call it the astronaut. The astronaut imagines new futures and new ideas, and that's where all human innovation and progress happens. But the thing is that the astronaut and the health and safety officer are constantly bickering. And the only way that change happens is when they're able to agree. And that process is you putting together the component parts of a better story. It starts with imagining a better world, a future. For Alistair, that was being an adventurer and not being Mr. Ordinary. It helps if you have a mentor, somebody that's achieved something similar before, so that you can look at that person and your health and safety officer can see that what you're about to do is actually achievable. And then you need to take action, cross the threshold. That doesn't mean turning down a perfectly good job, but you need to commit your story. If I were to ask you the question, what do you do? How would you answer that question? Well, you just did, and you probably answered the question, how do you make money? Right? But that wasn't the question I asked you. You could have answered anything. You could have said that I've got a couple of kids, or that I love cycling, or that I love going to music festivals. But you didn't. What happened in that situation is that your dominant story came out in a kind of auto-response. We all have lots of stories in our life. We've got stories about relationships and interests and hobbies and on and on. But these stories are either driving us or they're holding us back. So if your story is holding you back, how about another question? What journey are you on? How does that make you feel? Do you feel excited about an adventure, a journey, a future that you're looking for? Or does it make you feel like there's a gap? Does it make you feel like something's missing? Well, if it's the latter, it's time to change the story. So why not change it? Well, before today, what you probably would have done is you would have carried on autopilot, being limited by a story that's not serving you. But good news, because today I'm going to cure you of that inaction. This innocuous-looking can of deodorant contains a compound that will reduce life expectancy for anyone within a 100-meter radius to just 1 year. Hold on. If you can smell it, you're definitely infected. So, now we've all only got just a year to live. Don't worry, you'll thank me later. What we're probably going to do is we're going to put together a bucket list, right? A list of all of the stories that we aspire to with real action and urgency to get them ticked off as quickly as possible. But what if, as we're putting together that bucket list and those stories, they're not feeling good? They're feeling a bit hollow. What if in life, you're feeling a bit stuck and you're not sure what that new story is? Well, I think maybe sometimes we can do with a nudge. And so I've decoded a really simple pattern that you can use that will help you to provoke change when you need it in life. So it's easy to remember. Just think of a bird flying the nest, and that bird could be you on a journey of change. So it's NEST. Notice, explore, share, and then transform. It's really simple. N is to notice. Is your story serving you? Your gut knows. That's why we talk about gut instinct. Do you find yourself regularly talking about and thinking about that better world? Are you overcoming challenges on your way to get there? If you're not, your stories might not be serving you. It might be time to change it. So you need to get together the makings of a new story to keep your health and safety officer happy. So the next bit is to explore. Both physically and mentally, mix things up, get curious, try new things, hang out with different people, go to new places, read and listen to new things. With new inputs come new outputs. And what you'll find as you start to explore and open yourself up is that you'll see new energy and new ideas. As you're exploring, take every opportunity to silence your health and safety officer for as many of the small things in life as possible. For example, take a different route to somewhere that you need to go, order something different from the menu, go out of your way to speak to somebody that you wouldn't usually speak to. By doing this, you're training yourself to listen to your astronaut. As you explore, you'll notice that new ideas come up. You'll feel energized. Follow them. Remember, you've only got 1 year left to live. We don't want indecision. So now that you're going to have the makings of your new story, what you now need to do is share it. But before you can share it, write it down. Write down that vision of the future, that better world, with as much detail and clarity as possible. And then write down the challenges that you're going to need to overcome in order to reach that better world and who might need to help you. Once you've written it down, share it with one person. For Alistair, that was Mr. Walker, and then his friends and family. Once you've shared it with one person, it's much easier to share it with others. And with that, you start to commit your story to action. Part of the benefit of the share process is the story is always going to be different to how we imagined it. This is about kickstarting the change. And so what you're trying to do is get the makings of the story for your health and safety officer so that you can run away with your astronaut. Now it's time to transform. You've got the makings of your new story. Now you need to commit to it. You've heard the phrase before, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Well, now it's time to enjoy the journey. It's not going to be easy. It wouldn't be a good story if it was. So embrace the challenges as they come along. And if things get hard, then rely on your support team. Look to that mentor role and go back to that vision that you wrote down to fuel you when you most need it. And with regular commitment, you'll reach that better world. And with it, you'll have developed your change super skill. But then notice when that new story is no longer serving you. Because at that point, it's time to go around the cycle again. So let's go back to Alistair. After those 10 years, he was now a real adventurer, but he noticed that that new story was not serving him anymore. He now had a wife and kids, and those big, risky adventures, they just didn't feel the same anymore. Perhaps more importantly, he didn't get that butterfly feeling, that excitement that he used to get. And they didn't fit into his life in the same way, so he started to explore. How could he get that same kind of butterfly feeling in this new world? And so he came up with the idea of micro-adventure, little adventures that he could intersperse throughout his day-to-day life. For example, he'd put his kids to bed and then climb up a local hill, go to sleep underneath a tree for the night, and then come back before the kids had woken up. And with it, he started to find that butterfly feeling again. So he shared that with his wife and with his friends and family, and he wrote about it, and he's ready to transform. He was ready for his new story. So being a global adventurer is not very useful when you've got to go pick your kids up from the school gates at 3:00. So Alistair taught himself the violin, and he gave himself 1 month to travel on foot all the way across Spain, living on a day's busking at a time. If you want to hear the whole conversation, you can go listen to it on the podcast. So that answers that question of what was in that massive bag. It was a violin. But more importantly, it was a symbol of the importance of regularly rewriting your story in order to transform. What I can now see from these conversations with all these inspiring people is their ability to change and to embrace the unknown in order to live a life that's true to themselves. They regularly move from the known to the unknown landscapes of life, transforming as they go, never getting stuck and never living life waiting for life to happen to them, living a life that's true to themselves. So back to that question, what journey are you on? I'm on a journey to help as many people as possible to develop change as a super skill, because I believe that if everybody on the planet could live a life that's true to themselves, then the world would be a much, much better place for it. So, do you think it's possible that you could regret the life that you're living? Could you do with running on your own code rather than someone else's? Well, if that's the case, then the time to change is now. You only got 1 year left. It's down to you. No one else is going to do this for you. Take commitment. No more indecision. No more putting it off. Notice, explore, share, and then transform. And then do it again, and again, and again. And never stop. And never regret not living a life that you deserve. Thank you.